The dressing room door slammed shut with a sound so sharp that even the distant cheers of thousands of fans outside seemed to disappear. And when Jimin turned around, he found Jungkook sitting alone in the corner, tears silently falling onto his trembling hands. The final concert of the tour had ended only 20 minutes earlier. Outside, fireworks still painted the night sky. Staff members laughed in the hallways. The other members were busy greeting managers and thanking everyone who had worked tirelessly for months. Everything should have been filled with happiness. Everything should have felt like victory. Yet inside that small dressing room, the air carried something completely different. Jimin had never seen Jungkook cry like this. Not after exhausting rehearsals. Not after injuries. Not even during the hardest years they had endured together. These tears were quieter, heavier. As if they had been waiting for years to finally appear. Jungkook, the younger man, quickly wiped his face. Okay. Answer came automatically. Too quickly, too perfectly, Jimin's heart sank. That sentence had become Jungkook's armor, a wall nobody could climb. He closed the door behind him and walked closer. The bright lights above reflected against mirrors filled with discarded stage makeup, half-empty water bottles, and glittering jackets that still carried the warmth of the performance. The smell of sweat and perfume lingered in the air. Everything felt alive. Yet Jungkook looked completely exhausted, not physically, emotionally. His shoulders trembled as though carrying an invisible weight. Jimin slowly sat beside him, the silence between them stretched. Outside, someone shouted with excitement. A manager laughed. Life continued. But inside this room, time seemed frozen. You don't have to say you're okay, Jimin whispered. Jungkook stared at the floor. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice finally broke. What if I'm tired of being strong all the time? The question shattered something inside Jimin. Years of memories flooded his mind. The young boy who had left home at 15. The teenager who practiced until sunrise. The man who smiled on stage no matter how exhausted he felt. The person who always carried everyone's expectations without complaint. Jungkook had become someone people depended on, someone people admired. Someone people believed could handle everything alone. Perhaps that was the problem. Nobody asked whether he wanted to. Jimin swallowed hard. The younger man's fingers were clenched tightly together, small habits Jimin knew too well. Jungkook always did that when anxiety consumed him. He had noticed it years ago, but lately, he had been too busy, too distracted, too confident that everything was fine. The realization made guilt bloom in his chest. Jungkook finally spoke again. No, everyone thinks I'm happy. Another tear fell. And I am, he laughed bitterly. At least, I think I am. The words carried an uncertainty that frightened Jimin. The Jungkook he knew always spoke with conviction, even when afraid, even when nervous. But tonight he sounded lost, completely lost. Jimin looked at him carefully. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, subtle, easy for others to miss. His smile during the concert had been bright, perfect, professional. Yet now, every trace of that performance had vanished, leaving only the exhausted human underneath. When was the last time you slept properly? Jimin asked. Jungkook remained silent. That silence itself became the answer. Jimin closed his eyes. The signs had been there. Late-night practice sessions, hours alone in the gym, constantly helping others while refusing help himself, always saying yes, never saying no, never allowing himself to become a burden. The realization hurt, because Jimin had always promised himself that he would protect the people he loved. And somewhere along the journey he had failed to notice how much pain Jungkook carried alone. The younger man suddenly laughed through his tears. You know something funny? Jimin turned toward him. Don't even know why I'm crying. His voice trembled. He paused, the words struggled to escape. I just feel so tired. Outside, thunder echoed in the distance. The fireworks had ended. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. The atmosphere changed instantly. The celebration outside slowly faded into calm silence. Jimin looked at the person beside him, his closest friend, his family, someone who had always stood beside him through countless storms. And for the first time in years, Jimin understood that strength was not the absence of tears. Strength was allowing someone else to see them. Without thinking, Jimin placed a hand on Jungkook's shoulder. The younger man didn't move away. That alone spoke volumes. Jungkook hated showing weakness. He hated worrying others. Yet tonight, he remained exactly where he was. as if part of him desperately wanted someone to stay. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable, it felt honest, raw, human. The rain outside grew stronger. The city lights blurred against the wet glass. And suddenly memories returned to Jimin years ago. A tiny practice room, two boys chasing impossible dreams. Jungkook had once asked him a simple question. "Hyung, do you think people ever get tired of depending on others?" Jimin remembered answering without hesitation. "No, the people who love you never get tired." Back then, Jungkook had smiled, but now, Jimin wondered if he had ever truly believed those words himself. The younger man finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, vulnerable. "Think I've spent so much time taking care of everyone that I forgot how to ask for help." Confession hung in the air, simple, devastating. Jimin felt his throat tight. How lonely must someone become before admitting something like that? How many nights had Jungkook faced those emotions alone? How many smiles had hidden exhaustion? The thought made Jimin angry, not at Jungkook, at himself, at the world, at the expectations placed upon people simply because they appeared strong. He inhaled deeply, then he made a decision that would change everything. "We're taking a break." Jungkook blinked. "What?" Jimin's voice became firmer. "A real break." Younger man stared at him in disbelief. "The schedules." "I don't care." "The projects." "I don't care." "People are waiting." Jimin turned fully toward him. "And I'm waiting too." The words silenced everything. Rain continued falling, soft, steady. Jungkook looked completely stunned. Jimin rarely spoke with such determination. Yet this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only conviction. "Watched you carry everything for years," Jimin said quietly. "You take care of everyone. You protect everyone. You smile even when you're hurting." His voice softened. "Who's taking care of you?" The question broke whatever remained of Jungkook's composure. Fresh tears escaped. This time he didn't hide them, didn't apologize, didn't look away. For the first time in a very long time, he simply allowed himself to cry. And Jimin stayed beside him. No speeches, no solution, just presence. Sometimes that was enough. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The world outside felt distant. Eventually, Jungkook's breathing calmed. The storm within him slowly settled. He leaned back against the sofa. Exhaustion remained. But so did something new, relief. The relief of finally being seen. Jimin looked at him and remembered every moment they had shared together. Every success, every argument, every late-night conversation. Family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes family meant refusing to let someone suffer alone. The rain gradually weakened. The city became quiet. Staff members had already gone home. The building rested in peaceful silence. Jungkook finally spoke. "If taking a break disappoints people," Jimin smiled gently, "people who truly care about you won't be disappointed." He paused. "Be happy that you're finally taking care of yourself." Younger man looked uncertain. Years of responsibility could not disappear overnight. But for the first time, someone had given him permission to rest. And perhaps that was what he needed most. Jimin stood up. He picked up their jackets. The glitter from the performance still reflected under the dim lights, beautiful yet temporary, just like applause, just like expectations. What remained after everything faded were the people who stayed. Jimin extended his hand. "Come on." Jungkook looked up. "Where are we going?" Jimin smiled. "Home." The kind of home built from walls and furniture. But the kind created through trust, through understanding, through people who refused to leave. Jungkook hesitated, then slowly he accepted the hand. The tears had not magically fixed everything. The exhaustion had not vanished. Healing would take time. But tonight marked the beginning of something important. The moment he stopped carrying his burdens alone. And as they walked together through the quiet hallway, leaving behind the bright lights of the stage, Jimin knew that the biggest decision he had ever made was not about careers, schedules, or public expectations. It was the decision to choose the people he loved before everything else. Because no applause in the world could ever matter more than a single tear falling from someone who had spent an entire lifetime pretending to be unbreakable. The rain had already stopped when they stepped outside the venue, but the city still glistened beneath thousands of reflections. Every streetlight turning the wet pavement into rivers of gold. Jungkook pulled his hood lower. The noise of celebration remained somewhere behind them. For the first time in months, perhaps years, neither of them hurried toward another schedule. No managers called their names. No cameras followed their movements, only silence accompanied them. And strangely, that silence felt unfamiliar. Jimin noticed it immediately. Jungkook kept looking back, not because he wanted to return, but because he seemed unable to believe that he was allowed to leave everything behind, even for one night. The younger man had spent so much of his life moving forward that stopping felt almost terrifying. The car waiting for them remained untouched. Instead, Jimin made an unexpected decision. "Let's walk." Jungkook looked at him. "In this weather," Jimin laughed softly. Rain already ended. A small smile appeared on Jungkook's face, barely noticeable, but real. They walked through empty streets illuminated by neon signs and quiet cafes preparing to close for the night. The cool air carried the scent of wet asphalt and fresh coffee. People passed without recognizing them beneath their hats and masks. For a brief moment, they were not global stars. They were simply two people trying to find peace. Jungkook placed his hands inside his pockets. "I forgot what this feels like." "What?" "Walking without worrying about anything." Jimin turned toward him. "You used to love this." "I know." A gentle sadness entered Jungkook's voice. But somewhere along the way, he paused. "I stopped doing things just because I liked them." Confession lingered in the night air. Jimin understood. The higher someone climbed, the heavier expectations became. Passion slowly transformed into responsibilities. Simple joys turned into obligations. And without realizing it, people forgot who they had once been. The city around them remained alive. A bicycle rolled past. Music escaped from an old restaurant. Rainwater dripped rhythmically from rooftops. Life continued in ordinary ways, beautiful ways. Jimin suddenly remembered their trainee days. Back then, they used to wander through quiet neighborhoods after practice, too exhausted to talk, too hungry to care about tomorrow. Yet somehow they had laughed more, dreamed more, lived more honestly. He glanced at Jungkook. The younger man stared upward. Clouds slowly moved away, revealing pieces of the night sky. "I used to think success would make everything easier," Jungkook said. Jimin smiled. "And did it?" A soft laugh escaped. "No." Honesty surprised even Jungkook himself. He continued walking. "I thought if I worked harder, people would worry less about me. I thought if I smiled more, nobody would feel burdened." His voice lowered. "And I thought if I carried everything myself, everyone else could rest." The words struck Jimin deeply. How many invisible promises had Jungkook made to himself over the years? Promises nobody asked him to make, promises he could never truly keep. The pressure had become part of his identity, being dependable, being strong, being unbreakable. Yet even the strongest people needed somewhere to fall. The night breeze grew colder. Jimin removed his jacket and placed it over Jungkook's shoulders. The younger man protested immediately. "Hyung, you'll freeze." "Survive." A familiar argument. One repeated countless times throughout their lives. Jungkook sighed. Some habits never changed. And maybe that was comforting. They eventually reached a small convenience store hidden between old buildings. Its warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. Jimin suddenly stopped. Jungkook looked confused. "What? Do you remember?" The younger man's eyes widened. No further explanation was needed. Years ago, before anyone knew their names, they had visited places exactly like this, buying instant noodles, sharing snacks, talking about dreams that seemed impossibly distant, dreams that had somehow become reality. The memory softened something inside both of them. They entered. The gentle sound of the automatic door echoed through the quiet store. An elderly owner greeted them politely. No recognition, no excitement, only ordinary kindness. Jimin felt strangely grateful. They wandered through the aisles. Jungkook picked up a drink he hadn't bought in years. Jimin laughed. "You still like that? Some things never change." Answer carried more meaning than expected. Minutes later, they sat outside beneath a small awning. The world remained peaceful. Jungkook stared at the bottle in his hands. "I miss being normal sometimes." Confession came without warning. Jimin remained silent. Because he understood, there were things success could never replace. Anonymous walks, quiet mistakes, moments that belonged only to yourself, the freedom to fail without disappointing millions. Yet there was also gratitude, love, dreams fulfilled. Life was never simple enough to fit into one emotion. "I think everyone misses something," Jimin finally said. "People living the lives we once wanted." Jungkook considered those words. The older man continued. "Maybe happiness isn't about getting everything." He looked toward the city. Maybe it's about learning which things matter most. Younger man remained thoughtful. Rainwater continued dripping from the roof. The rhythm sounded almost musical. For the first time that night, Jungkook's shoulders appeared lighter, not healed, but lighter, as if sharing his burdens had made them easier to carry. Hours later, they finally arrived at their home. The building stood quietly beneath the moonlight, warm, familiar, safe. Inside, everything remained exactly as they had left it. Shoes near the entrance, blankets carelessly folded, small traces of ordinary life hidden between extraordinary schedules. Jungkook stood in the living room, motionless. Jimin noticed the strange expression on his face. "What is it?" The younger man smiled weakly. "I don't remember the last time I came home without immediately thinking about tomorrow." Those words broke Jimin's heart all over again. How exhausting must life become when rest itself feels unnatural? Without hesitation, Jimin made another decision. A bigger one. Tomorrow he would speak with everyone, managers, staff, anyone necessary. The endless cycle had to stop, not forever, but long enough for someone precious to breathe again. He would fight for that no matter what, because some things mattered more than expectations. Jungkook walked toward the window. The city lights sparkled below, beautiful, distant. He looked calmer now. Yet a shadow still remained behind his eyes. Years of exhaustion could not disappear in a single night. Healing was rarely dramatic. It happened slowly, quietly, like rain nourishing the earth after a storm. Jimin approached him. "Want some tea?" A small laugh emerged. "Becoming old, Hyung. You're becoming dramatic." Familiar teasing returned, gentle, comfortable, real. Jungkook smiled again. This time it reached his eyes. As Jimin prepared the tea, he watched the younger man from the kitchen. Something inside him had fundamentally changed tonight. The tears in that dressing room had opened his eyes. He had spent years celebrating Jungkook's strength, admiring his resilience, depending on his endless energy. But perhaps true love meant recognizing when someone was tired of being strong. Perhaps family meant protecting each other not only from the world, but also from the impossible expectations they placed upon themselves. The kettle whistled softly. Warm steam filled the air. The simple scent of tea leaves transformed the atmosphere into something peaceful, human, ordinary. Jungkook sat on the couch. The exhaustion remained visible, yet for once he allowed himself to look tired. No masks, no performances, no forced smiles, only honesty, and maybe that was the bravest thing he had ever done. Jimin handed him a cup. Their fingers briefly touched. Years of memories existed within that simple gesture, unspoken understanding, silent promises. A bond built through countless storms. The night grew deeper. Neither of them spoke much afterward. Words were no longer necessary. The silence had changed. It no longer carried loneliness. It carried companionship. And as Jungkook slowly closed his eyes, listening to the quiet sounds of home, he realized something that had escaped him for a very long time. He did not have to carry every burden alone. Someone had finally seen the cracks behind his smiles. And instead of walking away, they had chosen to stay.
Morning arrived quietly, but Jungkook had already been awake for hours. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting golden lines across the living room floor, yet the apartment remained wrapped in an unusual stillness. No alarms, no managers calling, no schedules waiting to devour every minute of the day. The silence itself felt unnatural. Jungkook sat near the window with a cup of coffee growing cold between his hands. The city below was waking up. Cars moved slowly through the streets. People hurried toward ordinary lives, and for once he envied them, not because he regretted his own journey, never that, but because they could disappear into crowds without carrying expectations heavier than themselves. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass, his reflection stared back, tired eyes, a forced calm, a smile that had learned how to exist even when happiness was nowhere to be found. The truth frightened him. He couldn't remember when he had started pretending so well. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed. Jimin appeared, wearing oversized clothes and messy hair, looking nothing like the charismatic performer millions adored. He looked like home. He carried 2 warm sandwiches in his hands. "You didn't sleep much." Jungkook didn't turn around. "Did you know?" Jimin smiled. "You always make coffee at sunrise when something is bothering you." Answer stunned him, such a small habit, one he had never even noticed himself, yet Jimin had remembered, for years. The realization warmed something deep inside his chest. Jimin sat beside him, neither spoke for a while. The morning sunlight grew stronger, birds gathered on distant rooftops, life continued with quiet determination. Finally, Jungkook broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder who you would have been if none of this happened?" Jimin looked outside. The question carried enormous weight, the kind of question people only asked when their souls were exhausted. Sometimes, Jimin admitted. What about you? A faint smile appeared. Every day. Honesty shocked even himself. Jimin remained calm, no judgment, no surprise, only understanding. Jungkook lowered his eyes. I think about ordinary things. His voice became softer. Going to university. Having a normal group of friends. Walking outside without hiding. He laughed quietly. Getting lost somewhere and nobody caring who I am. The words weren't complaints, they were grief. Grief for a life he never had the chance to experience. And grief was complicated. People assumed successful individuals had no right to feel it, but every choice created another path left behind. Every dream fulfilled required another dream to be sacrificed. Jimin listened carefully. He understood that this wasn't about fame, it was about identity, about wondering who existed beneath years of expectations and responsibilities. The older man took a deep breath. I used to think about that too. Jungkook turned toward him. But then I realized something. Sunlight illuminated Jimin's face, gentle, warm. I would still want to meet the people I met in this life. The words hung in the air, simple yet profoundly meaningful. Jungkook remained silent. Jimin continued. Maybe another version of me would have different dreams, different regrets, different happiness. He smiled. But that version wouldn't know you. Younger man's eyes widened. Emotion slowly returned to his expression. Hyung, Jimin looked at him directly. So no matter how difficult things become, his voice softened. I don't regret finding my family. Room fell silent. Outside the city kept moving, but inside time seemed to stop. Jungkook looked away, because tears were already threatening to return, not from pain this time, but from something infinitely more dangerous, being understood. It was astonishing how terrifying genuine understanding could feel when someone had spent years hiding their struggles. The sound of a phone vibrating suddenly interrupted everything. Jimin glanced at the screen. Several missed calls, messages from managers, schedules, meetings, questions. The world was already trying to pull them back. Jungkook noticed immediately. His expression changed. The old instincts returned. I should answer. He reached forward, but Jimin gently moved the phone away. No, younger man blinked. Today, Hyung people are waiting. They can wait. Firmness in Jimin's voice silenced him. For years, Jungkook had believed that resting was selfish, that taking time for himself meant disappointing others. The belief had become part of his existence. A prison disguised as responsibility. Jimin understood that now, and he refused to let it continue. The older man stood up. His decision had already been made. I'm talking to everyone today. Jungkook immediately rose. You don't have to do that. I know. Then why? Jimin turned around. His expression carried an unusual seriousness. Because I should have done it years ago. Answer struck like lightning, a painful truth hidden beneath years of affection. Jimin blamed himself, not completely, not irrationally, but enough to wish he had noticed sooner, enough to regret every moment he had mistaken silence for strength. The younger man's voice trembled. You didn't do anything wrong. A gentle smile appeared. Maybe. Jimin walked closer. But I could have done better. Those words carried enormous love. The kind that refused to remain comfortable, the kind willing to admit mistakes, the kind willing to change. Jungkook looked down. His chest felt unbearably tight. Throughout his entire life he had been the one protecting others, taking care of others, standing strong for others. Nobody had ever made sacrifices for him like this. Nobody had ever fought battles he didn't ask them to fight. The realization overwhelmed him. Meanwhile, outside the apartment, dark clouds slowly gathered once more. Summer storm approached the city. The wind grew stronger. The atmosphere shifted. Jimin eventually left to make several important calls. The apartment became quiet again. Jungkook remained alone. But unlike previous nights, the loneliness felt different. Less suffocating, less endless. He wandered into his studio. The familiar scent of wood, equipment, and unfinished songs welcomed him. Music had always been his refuge, a place where emotions could exist without explanation. He sat before the piano. His fingers touched the keys, softly, carefully, no pressure, no expectations, just sound. A gentle melody emerged, simple, melancholic, beautiful, the kind of music born not from perfection but honesty. For the first time in a very long while, Jungkook wasn't composing for anyone else, not for fans, not for performances, not for success, only for himself. The realization almost made him cry again. Hours later, thunder echoed across the city. Rain returned, heavy, relentless. Jimin finally came home. Water dripped from his coat. His expression remained calm, yet something had clearly happened. Jungkook immediately stood. What did they say? The older man removed his shoes. Silence, then a small smile appeared. I told them everything. Jungkook's heart stopped. Everything, their exhaustion, the tears, the pain he had hidden for years. Panic filled his chest. You told them? Jimin nodded. And do you know what happened? The younger man waited. Fear and uncertainty consumed him. Jimin laughed softly. They agreed. World seemed to freeze. Agreed that you need time. Storm outside intensified, rain battered the windows, yet inside the apartment something miraculous occurred. The burden Jungkook had carried for countless years suddenly became lighter, not gone, but shared. People understood, people cared, people wanted him to heal. The truth was almost impossible to believe. His knees weakened, he slowly sat down, tears returned once more. But these tears felt different, not hopeless, not lonely. They were tears of relief. The tears of someone realizing that asking for help did not make him weak. It simply made him human. Jimin walked over and sat beside him. No dramatic speeches followed, no grand declarations, just two people existing within the quiet aftermath of honesty. Outside, the storm continued. But for the first time in a very long time, Jungkook no longer felt like he was facing it alone. And somewhere deep within his heart, a question he had carried since childhood finally found an answer. What happens when the strongest person finally allows himself to rest? Perhaps. He discovers that love was waiting for him all along. The storm lasted all night, and by dawn the entire city seemed to breathe more slowly, as if even the world understood that some wounds needed silence before they could heal. Jungkook woke to the sound of piano music, soft, familiar, melancholic. He opened his eyes and found pale morning light spilling across the living room, turning everything golden and dreamlike. For a moment he didn't remember where he was, or rather, he didn't remember why his chest felt lighter. Then he remembered the dressing room, the tears, Jimin's promise, the impossible decision that someone had made for his sake. A strange emotion settled inside him, gratitude and guilt. The two feelings had always lived together within him. Whenever someone cared for him, guilt followed. Whenever someone sacrificed something for him, he immediately wondered if he deserved it. It was an exhausting way to live, and he had lived like that for years. The piano continued. Jungkook quietly walked toward the music. Jimin sat near the window, his fingers moving slowly over the keys of an old melody they both knew from their trainee days. The song was unfinished, just like the dreams they once had. Jimin noticed him but didn't stop playing. Couldn't sleep. Jungkook leaned against the doorway. I actually slept too much. Answer earned a soft laugh. Then congratulations. Younger man smiled. Perhaps it was the first genuine morning smile he had given in months. Outside, rainwater still rested on rooftops and roads, reflecting pieces of the blue sky that had finally returned. The storm had passed. At least the one outside had. Inside, another storm still remained. Jungkook sat beside the piano, his hands rested on his knees, quiet, thoughtful. After several moments he finally spoke. Did they really understand? Jimin's fingers stopped moving. The final note lingered in the air. The question itself carried fear, not curiosity. Fear. Fear that people would secretly resent him. Fear that rest would be seen as weakness. Fear that admitting exhaustion would destroy the image everyone loved. Jimin turned toward him. More than you think. Jungkook looked down. I don't know how to believe that. Honesty surprised even himself. Jimin nodded slowly. Because you've spent years believing the opposite. The words landed gently, no accusations, no judgment, only truth. The older man closed the piano lid. You know what your biggest problem is? Jungkook blinked. What? Jimin smiled sadly. You think love has conditions. Silence, complete silence. The sentence struck deeper than anything else. Jungkook opened his mouth, closed it again because somewhere inside himself he knew it was true. Love had always felt connected to effort, to achievements, to usefulness, to being dependable. He had learned early that people praised him when he worked harder, smiled brighter, sacrificed more. And without realizing it, he had begun believing that his value depended entirely on what he gave others, never on who he was. The realization terrified him. Jimin continued quietly. You think people love you because you never complain, because you're strong, because you're always there. His expression softened. But what happens if you're tired? The younger man remained silent. What happens if you need help? Another silence. What happens if you can't carry everyone anymore? Jungkook looked away. Because he had never allowed himself to imagine that possibility. Deep down he feared abandonment, not in obvious ways, not dramatically, but quietly. The fear that if he stopped being useful, people would eventually leave. The fear that his imperfections would outweigh everything good. The fear that someone stronger, happier and less complicated could replace him. The fear had followed him since childhood, and fame had only taught him to hide it better. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, more honest. Jimin placed a hand on his shoulder. Nothing changes. Jungkook slowly lifted his head. You hear me? His voice was calm. Nothing changes. Emotion gathered behind Jungkook's eyes. The words sounded so simple, yet accepting them felt impossible. The front door suddenly opened. Laughter echoed through the apartment. Familiar voices filled the air. Jungkook froze. Jimin grinned. I invited everyone. Before another question could be asked, the other members entered carrying bags of food, snacks and coffee. The atmosphere instantly transformed, warm, loud, alive. One of them held up a large bag. Kidnapping you for breakfast. Another laughed. No schedules, no cameras, no work. Someone else added dramatically, the official mission today is making Jungkook do absolutely nothing. Room exploded with laughter, but Jungkook couldn't move because nobody looked disappointed, nobody looked frustrated, nobody blamed him. Instead, their eyes held only concern, affection, relief. As though they had been waiting for him to finally stop pretending, the youngest member felt his throat tighten. One of them walked over and placed a gentle hand on his head. "You idiot," the words carried enormous tenderness. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" Tears threatened to return. The old Jungkook would have apologized, would have laughed, would have changed the subject, but today was different. His voice trembled. "I didn't want to burden anyone." Room fell silent, then another member sighed. "And carrying everything yourself wasn't a burden." A painful truth, simple, unavoidable. Everyone moved into the living room. Food covered the table. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the apartment. Outside, sunlight continued breaking through the remaining clouds. The atmosphere became softer, safer, conversations flowed naturally. Stories from years ago emerged, embarrassing memories, old arguments, moments they had almost forgotten. And throughout everything, Jungkook listened, really listened. For years he had focused on protecting others. Today he allowed himself to be protected. The experience felt overwhelming, beautiful and frightening all at once. At one point, someone casually mentioned taking a vacation together. A real one, no work, no obligations. Just people who cared about each other. The suggestion immediately filled the room with excitement. Jungkook watched their faces, their laughter, their ridiculous arguments about destinations. And suddenly something inside him broke, not painfully, gently, like ice melting after a long winter. He realized that the world would continue turning even if he rested. People would still love him, dreams would still exist, nothing important would disappear. The understanding arrived quietly, without fireworks. Without dramatic revelations, just warmth, human warmth. That evening after everyone left, the apartment returned to silence. But now the silence felt entirely different. It no longer resembled loneliness, it resembled peace. Jungkook stood on the balcony. The city glowed beneath the evening sky. Wind played with his hair. Jimin joined him moments later. Neither spoke immediately. Words weren't necessary. Finally, Jungkook broke the silence. "Hyung." "HM," the younger man smiled. A genuine, unguarded smile. "Thank you for finding me that night." Jimin looked toward the horizon. "Truth, what?" The older man laughed softly. "Think you've been waiting to be found for a very long time." Answer carried no sadness, only understanding. And as darkness slowly embraced the city below, Jungkook realized that perhaps healing wasn't about becoming strong again. Perhaps healing meant learning that he had never needed to be strong every single moment in the first place. For the first time in years, tomorrow no longer frightened him, and that small miracle felt bigger than any stage he had ever stood upon.